Good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock and we will call the meeting to order. My name is David Matthews. I'm standing in for Tom Hill, who has had an unfortunate death in the family and had to be out of town. So we offer Tom our condolences and look forward to his return at the next meeting. First order of business is an appointment of the chair.
Since Chair Matthews and I both need appointments, we've decided to appoint each other. Moved by Ferguson, seconded by Bochak. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment appoints David Matthews as the chair in the absence of Tom Hill.
I have a vote on a seconder. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you, Mike. Carrie? We should have both killed her.
So then you sign. We can sign it again or as
And I have a resolution. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments appoints the acting clerk as the acting secretary treasurer in the absence of the secretary treasurer. But I have a seconder for that. Mr. Ferguson. Oh, sorry, we have that. Yes. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. So far, pretty easy. Does anybody on the committee have any declaration of pecuniary interest in any of the applications before us today? Seeing none, we'll move on to adoption of the agenda. Boy, paper. Be it resolved, the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments adopts the agenda dated November 15th, 2019. All those in favor? Carried. Now, this is my speech, right? This morning's meeting, there will be a public meeting scheduled for 5 minor variance applications and 2 consent applications. I will attempt to briefly summarize the procedure to be utilized in the meeting. First, the Secretary-Treasurer will advise the committee as to when, how, and to whom notice of each of the hearings was circulated for the applications being considered. Next, each of the applications will be considered separately. Planning staff will advise of the purpose and effect of the application and provide any other information that is relevant. The Secretary-Treasurer will summarize any correspondence on file. From there, the applicant will make a brief presentation if they so choose, and the public will have an opportunity to speak to the applications being considered. After the public forum, the committee will then deliberate on the proposed applications and consider a motion to pass, defeat, or defer the decision of the applicant for the applications. The minor variance applications being considered this morning are B19-11 for 129 Heathvalley Trail, B19-12 for 3148 Island 820 Georgian Bay, A19-43 for 225 Steep Rock Road. I think that should be Steep Rock Road. Number 4, A19-45 for 321 Pratt's Road, A19-46 for 24758 Georgian Bay Shores, A19-47 for 450 White Falls Road, and A19-48 125 Ravine Way. To the Secretary.
Notice of each of the applications was sent by first-class mail to the respective owners and assessed persons within 120 meters, 500 meters, or 800 meters, and to those persons and agencies likely to have an interest in the application. The notices were sent at least 20 days prior to this morning's meeting. Included in each notice was an explanation of the purpose and the effect of the application and the key map showing the location of the property. Other relevant information may also have been provided. These circulations were provided in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act 1990.
Thank you. To the Planning Department, Victoria.
Morning. So our first application is consent application B19-11 for Vincenzo and Joanne Verducci. So the purpose of this application is to request a lot boundary adjustment, which would transfer a portion of lands currently under the ownership of the applicants to the adjacent lot. The area that is to be transferred encompasses the shoreline of the benefiting lands. So here we have an overview map of where the subject lands are located. As you can see here, they're located to the east of where we currently are at the township office and front onto Leduc Bay, located on Gloucester Pool. And here we have a zoomed in map of the benefiting and ownership lands here. As you can see, this is Leduc Bay, and here it is not colored as water, but it is in fact water. So the properties are currently designated waterfront in the official plan and zoned shoreline residential type 1 in the zoning bylaw. So this is just a general overview of the proposal in approximate terms, just to kind of give you an overall concept of what is being proposed here. So the area in blue is the proposed lands to be transferred. Currently, this approximate area in blue is under the ownership of the lands outlined in red. And so what this application would effectively do is allow for the area to go back towards the to go back into ownership of the lands located in yellow. So essentially to fix the ownership of this portion to allow for the lot ownership to align with the functionality of the lot. And no development is proposed on the benefiting lands at this time. So here is the survey screenshot, just further showing you what we're looking at here. So essentially this area hatched out in A, identified as A, would be brought back into ownership with the lot that it is adjacent to. So here we have some photos of the subject land. So this is a photo of the rear of the dwelling that exists on the benefiting lands. And this is the front of the dwelling. So here we have a view of the existing shoreline. So essentially, in general, this portion here is what would go back into the ownership of the lot with this dwelling on it here. And here we have a view from the shoreline looking towards the benefiting lands and the lands that currently hold ownership of that shoreline area. And this is a photo of the existing dock that is located in this area, and it is important to note that no additional docks would be allowed to be built from this application due to a holding restriction on this portion of Leduc Bay that does exist. And here we have a photo of the adjacent lot to the south, which is adjacent to the benefiting lands. And then here we just have a photo of this shoreline area that would be transferred and the adjacent shoreline to the south. And again, just making note that no additional dock would be allowed to be built in this area. So the proposed boundary adjustment would correct an ownership misalignment and ensure that the ownership of the subject lands correlates to the functionality of the properties. Staff do support the application with the inclusion of the conditions as outlined in the staff report. And if you have any questions for myself, the owners are also here if you have any questions for them.
Thank you, Victoria. Has any written correspondence been received for this application?
There is one letter citing no objections from the District of Muskoka.
Thank you. Would the applicant please approach, is the applicant present? Yes. Would you please approach and state your name and use the microphone? I'll also take this moment just to advise everybody to please put your cell phones on silent, speak into the microphone, and if you're sitting in the back, this session is supposed to be televised, but I'm not seeing a blue light, but assuming it is, if you could keep the chatter to a dull roar or move outside so it doesn't disrupt everybody else, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Could you push the little button? There you go. Thank you.
My name is Lorenzo Verducci.
And my name is Vincenzo Verducci.
Is there anything that you would like to add from Victoria's presentation today?
It seems that's what we're looking for, yes.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this application? Seeing none. Does the applicant have anything else to add? I'm assuming not.
We just kind of want to just reinstate it to the way it was.
Right, okay. Thank you. Well, we'll close the public portion of this meeting, and we'll turn the questions over to the committee. Mr. Cooper.
Just a couple of quick questions for clarification. So this is on Little Lake, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, on Little Lake, yes, in Gloucester. Yeah.
Just want to make sure I understand. And secondly, the adjacent lot that's there, that's, I think it was maybe your first picture that showed sort of the aerial view, that one, yes. Does that lot have access to the waterfront? Is there shore road allowance that they own? Just, I'm making sure that they also have access. I just want to understand that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, just to confirm, are you speaking about this lot here? So it's my understanding, and the owners can confirm if it's true, but I believe from a functionality standpoint, they have been using this area kind of adjoining, since it is one family that does own all three lots. So they have been using it historically as their access point, but technically this lot here, their shoreline would effectively be reduced to this point here, and they would not be allowed to put in another dock.
So what is the shoreline that's adjacent to that large red square? I mean, is there shore road allowance that's available to them, or to the current owner of that land?
So through you, Mr. Chair, there is no shore road allowance there, no.
So what is that? What are we looking at between the water and this red
So-
triangle?
So
Whatever it
this
is.
area in here is a separate owned lot. Yeah, so
Oh.
it's a different, it's a funky way that the lots have been laid out in that area. So it's a separate private lot that they would not be able to have access.
So just looking to the future, if both these lots were sold, how does red square, access the water?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I do believe the owners would likely, prior to that happening, put in some sort of easement to allow them to use this area, but I don't think that's the intent of the owners. I believe to just keep the shoreline area to be just for this lot, but they can confirm what they.
So any future owner would have to, if the two lots are owned individually and separately, we've now basically said lot in red no longer has water access.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. Essentially, currently the red lot has water access, and this application would change the water access to the yellow lot.
So I just wanted everybody to understand what's going on here for future considerations. Thank you.
Yes, I sort of had the same idea in mind as how that was going to work. Just a question, are you representing both, one the retained and the other?
Yeah,
Okay,
the
yes.
father and son,
So
yes.
it's an agreement, and it was previously already this way, but then changed, and now it's going back?
Exactly.
Previously was like, yeah, when we bought it, we find out that the previous owner, he did change that. So basically, she sold that yellow land to somebody else, and then we find out, the previous owner find out he doesn't have no access in the lake. Because the red lot, which I own it, owns the whole front, right? So the guy then says, I got no use for it, and then I end up to buy the next lot, because it was a benefit to me, so then I own everything. So now what I want to do, I want to restate it, not for reselling or anything, it's because I have my daughter and my son, and I would like to give one lot each, and I like both of them to have access to the lake. That's the only reason. Sorry, okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Caddo, any comments?
No, I'm good.
Councillor Bochek.
Yeah, I'm going to direct my question to our zoning department, our planning department. We have a bylaw in place that does not allow for backlot development. Essentially, are we not doing that by allowing this to happen? We've created a backlot with, it doesn't have water access. So the lot in red that is going to be created really becomes a back lot, does it not?
So through you, Mr. Chair, all portion of the lots right now are currently zoned shoreline residential one, so they don't have backlot zoning. And the reason why the area in red would not go into, or would not go into a backlot type of situation is they would still have, as you can see here, it's probably better to see here, this portion in here would still give them a small amount of frontage
Okay.
on the waterfront.
Right.
However, and that's what we were kind of pointing out, is this would not allow, for instance, them to put in another dock to further congest this area of the bay, because no dock would be allowed. So technically the lot would still maintain water frontage in the sense of, you know, they can put a boat in off the shore or what have you, but in the standpoint of a backlot, we wouldn't be creating a backlot in this instance.
Okay, and second to that, the shore road allowance on these properties, are they owned by the landowners currently?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, they're all closed, and I believe all the shore road along this bay is all closed.
So there would have to be a transfer of the shore road allowance to the new lot created?
I believe that happened back in the 70s, I believe, when I pulled the information.
Okay.
And I believe that's kind of why this odd ownership happened at that time. It was kind of just a mishap.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Mr. Ferguson?
Well, if red lot owner is willing to give up his lot frontage to yellow lot, and they're both in agreement with it, I see no reason to object to it.
I guess, yeah, I think just to clarify from what Victoria was saying, red lot is actually not giving up total water access. They do have a little triangle there to the upper part of the blue. Is that correct, Victoria?
And that's why they are proposing kind of a little bit of a funky jog in there
Right.
to still maintain essentially pedestrian access to the water, yeah.
Good, thank you. Mr. Cooper?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about the future here, and looks like the shore road allowance in front of Red Lot was sold to somebody up there, which is kind of, we're not supposed to do, but has happened. So that's one. Two, what I'm failing to understand is Red Lot, so let's suppose that sometime in the future, and this happens often, these are sold, we effectively are providing for yellow lot to have water access, but not for red lot in the future. And I've said this already, but I'm wondering why there isn't, for example, an easement agreement so that that wouldn't happen, so that red lot would have access to the waterfront. Is there some reason that an easement wasn't suggested?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, because the application as it was brought forward was for the purposes of this family to maintain those lots, so there was not a discussion had about putting an easement over for water access, and I'm unsure if the owners, I don't believe they intend to ever sell the lots, but again, they might be able to comment on that. When it comes to kind of taking water access from one and the other, the way that staff is looking at this application is the way that this functions, taking away the ownership portion of it, the way that it functions, this is the lot that technically has the water frontage, and that's why staff believes that this ownership change does make more sense from a functional standpoint, whereas this lot clearly is more of a typical residential lot versus shoreline. But when it comes to the easement, the owners may be able to give you some insight as to.
The red lot is divided into A and B. A never had lakefront. B has it and will have it. We're not taking away lakefront from let's call it B.
No use of the dock.
No. No use of the dock, no. But the lakefront will remain. They will have a large portion of lakefront.
I understand. What I'm just trying to point out here is that in the future, red lot will not have access, boat access, water access to, so we're making a future change that will be in place forever,
Oh, they will have
regardless of
water.
the ownership.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and that is a good point to bring up. However, I think it is also important to note that even today, if we were to not make any changes here, no other docks would be permitted regardless of ownership in this bay anyway. So even if they did sell the yellow lot, for instance, no docks are permitted regardless.
But sorry, if I could just continue on here. I understand that. What I'm saying is, we are taking away a use for red lot. And so, effectively, in terms of water access, yes, they have water access in the sense that they can walk down to the shoreline, but they can't bring in a boat. So, and if the two lots were owned by two completely different people, we've changed the use of red lot, which presently has a dock and use of a dock. So I just wanted to point that out from the perspective of the meaning of what we're doing here for future owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I think, if I may, we've essentially transferred the dockage from red lot to yellow lot. Correct? Victoria? Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Any comments? I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments approve consent application B19-11 to facilitate a lot boundary adjustment regarding the benefiting lands located at 129 Heathvalley Trail, subject to the following. The deeds for the easement are submitted to the Secretary Treasurer along with registered copies of a survey plan. That a complete set of digital drawings, files of the reference plan shall be provided to the Township of Georgian Bay. That section 50-3 of the Planning Act, if applied to all future transactions involving the subject lands. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next, we have B19-12 for Payette Island, 3148 Island, 820 Georgian Bay. To the planner, please.
So the last consent application that we have today is B19-12. So the application is proposing to facilitate a lot boundary adjustment. So on the screen, you can see a zoomed out version of the subject land. So it is on Mermaid Island, the known name for that island, and within Honey Harbor. Subject land is zoned Shoreline Residential Island Type 1, and it's designated waterfront within the Honey Harbor Coastal Waterfront Community. To give you a closer view of where the subject property is, it is directly across from the Honey Harbor Boat Club and Nautilus Marina, to put you kind of into perspective on where we're talking about. Just an aerial view of the subject lands. So the lot to the west is the benefiting lands. To give you an overview of what the application is proposing, so there is a boathouse. I'm sure once I show you the photos, most of you will recognize which boathouse I'm referring to. So what they're proposing, it's currently on both properties. So it's tucked into this little bay, but since the owner, which is the benefiting lands, wants to rebuild this boathouse, but since it's developed on both properties, we can't issue a building permit until it's solely on one property. So they're proposing the lot boundary adjustment, and they're proposing a 5-meter side yard setback around, so their side lot line will change so that it's fully on their property and meet the setbacks. So the resultant lot, which is the severed, so this portion here, which is 130 square meters in size, that will be added to lot 2. We'll have a lot frontage of 80 meters and a lot area of 6,131.2 square meters, where the minimum is 60 meters of lot frontage and 4,000 square meters of lot area. And the retained land, which is the land lot 3 here, so it's just a partial survey, will have a lot frontage of 90 meters and a lot area of 9,658.8. Just to give you an overview, you can see that boathouse. I'm sure most of you recognize it. So the boathouse will be going to this lot here on the left side of the screen, and they will be doing the lot boundary adjustment. So just to give you an overview again of where that boathouse is, as you can see, it is in need of repair. So the lot line currently cuts through the boathouse. So the lot boundary adjustment will have that 5-meter setback and allow it to be fully on the benefiting lands. Just another view of that boathouse. And this is the retained lands, which you may recognize. They did do a previous minor variance either early this year or late last year to put an addition on that property. And it is situated about 40 meters away from where that existing boathouse is. So as you can see, when you look at the subject lands, it looks as if the boathouse does belong on the benefiting lands. So the boathouse does meet, the lot boundary adjustment does meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw as it complies with lot area and lot frontage. And our official plan allows for lot boundary adjustments to be done if it doesn't result in the creation of a new lot, which it does not. So staff are supportive of the provisional consent to be approved, subject to the conditions that are outlined in the report and on the resolutions in front of you. The agent for the applicant is present if you have any questions for himself or if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Dana. Secretary, was there any written correspondence received from the public on this application?
There was one letter citing no objections from the District of Muskoka.
Mr. Gudaitis, would you care to approach the
Yes,
committee? I think you know the routine.
I haven't met the Payettes, so I'm not sure if they're here. I haven't seen them. Okay. I didn't want to speak on their behalf. And I'd like to clarify, I think Councillor Bocek may have an inadvertent conflict of interest because his wife works for us, and the lands that are going to be, if that's approved, the lands that are going to be transferred will benefit our client. So I didn't, just by way of full disclosure.
Mr. Bocek?
Thank you, Mr. Gagaitis. And yes, I was unaware that you were representing the applicant, so I will declare a possible pecuniary interest and conflict of interest if I could have the book, and I will sign it and step away.
Thank you for that clarification.
B19.
Just while we're waiting here for a minute, as many of you may be aware, there was a drowning, one on 6 Mile Lake, one on Gibson Lake, involved a gentleman and his dog. And I know that Armin was very, very involved in searching a very vast area to try and find the dog. And I'd like to recognize our appreciation for that.
Thank you for that. That's kind of you, but I can't take that much credit. There was a gentleman named Doug Morrow who really headed up the search for the missing animal. And it was a 7-year-old Newfoundlander dog named Murphy. And we have a soft spot in our hearts for 7-year-old Newfoundlanders because we have a grand dog named Ralph that is 7 years old. And they're very emotional dogs and so on. And when I heard what was going on, I thought I'd better do something. So anyway, I spent a lot of time stopping into different people's driveways and calling for Murphy, but I haven't heard the outcome whether they found him or not, but it's been quite a while now, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Gudaitis, for your contributions.
Thank you.
Proceed, please.
Well, I'm just going to give a little bit of background on this. The neighbors who own the boathouse that you saw in the, could we switch back, Dana, to that picture of the aerial photo? So the neighbors who bought the property a number of years ago, the Fitzpatricks, they inherited this lovely piece of construction that was done by a previous owner. And unfortunately, a tree fell on it one year, and then the next year, a big boulder became dislodged off of the cliff and fell down and crushed it. So it's not safe for use any longer. Their insurance company is willing to contribute to the repair. So they had asked us to make an application for the replacement of the boathouse because there's not much of it worth saving. So we did that, and I had actually at the time suggested to the Fitzpatricks that they attempt to buy this piece of property that's now being proposed, to bring it all into their ownership so that there wasn't going to be an awkward situation where they were investing a lot of money to on somebody else's property. And so they eventually came to that conclusion with the help of the planning and building departments here, and Dana was very helpful on the process. So we decided to suggest to them that to the Fitzpatricks and their neighbors, the Payettes, that they come to some agreement, and I believe that's been reached now, and that's why we're here today. So I'm kind of representing both families, and Councillor Bocek had no way of knowing that he would have been in a conflict, so I thought I'd better bring that forward. If anybody has any questions about it, I think it makes good planning sense to do what we're doing, but that'll be up to you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to this application? Seeing none, I will close the public portion of the meeting and ask for any questions around the table. Mr. Caddo.
No, I'm in support of this. It cleans up the encroachment, and the boathouse is a bit of an eyesore, and I'm sure you're going to make it look a lot better than what it is now, so I support this.
Mr. Ferguson.
I mirror Mr. Caddo's remarks. This makes sense from many perspectives.
Mr. Demke.
I understand why we would do this, and I appreciate that. I just had a question, like how could it be built on the lot line to start with? Like that would have been a long time ago? And how could that be approved?
For you, Chair Matthews, to Member Demke, I believe the boathouse was built over 60 years ago.
I don't think it's through you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe it was quite that long ago, but the original owner of this property, a fellow named Carl Kaufman from Kitchener, was the one that built the boathouse himself originally, and I think he did it with the permission of the previous neighbor, none of them realizing where the lot line was, so it's probably not the only time that's happened.
So it was just an informal agreement and they built it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just for clarification, I'm still confused as to who actually initially built this, the eastern property owner or the western property owner? If that's east and west, but whatever, the right versus the left.
Chair Matthews, to Member Cooper, so the property owner of Lot 2 originally built the boathouse.
And they encroached.
And they encroached onto the neighbor's land. So the new owner wants to rebuild the boathouse, because as you can see, the state it's in, and we can't issue a building permit until it's solely on their land.
Right, so we're effectively, what we're doing here is making sure that it's their property now, and I get that. So the second question is relevant to waterfront properties. I'm assuming that the eastern right-hand lot has access to their shoreline and have docks and can get to their property, is that correct?
Yes, so their dock is on the right-hand side, so they have over 90 meters of lot frontage, so they have ample room.
Thank
and
you.
they're good.
I just have one question for Mr. Gaius. The style of boathouse, it doesn't really affect, but it's my curiosity. Is it going to be floating? Is it going to be a permanent one that similar to what was there, or do you know yet?
The jury is still out on it, but Dana, have you got a picture of what was proposed to the planning department by any chance? Or okay, I wasn't sure what stage that was at. What we had suggested, and I don't know whether the budget will permit at this point, but was to actually build one that was tucked right into the cliff. and with a sloping flat roof. The minimum slope that we're allowed for boathouses in Honey Harbor and for most of Georgian Bay, I believe, is a 3-to-1 pitch. But what we had suggested was to make it in such a way that it could be backfilled with a green roof, and so that it would really blend into the hill nicely and not have that crazy pitch, because it's never been a pretty boathouse from the beginning, and it proved to be an unsafe one as well. So we were going to put structural steel and anchor it into the rock on both sides and make it so that it's basically just an open slip and with a cover on it. And but they haven't decided yet. I guess it depends. We had to take baby steps and get this approval before they go to the next level, but they are applying to the insurance company for some assistance on this.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. Any further questions? Mr. Cooper.
Yes, so just a clarification on that. So the idea is to replace a crib or whatever boathouse with another crib boathouse as opposed to a floating boathouse, which, given our current water levels and decreases and increases, allow for a lot more flexibility. This is going to be a permanent shoreline structure that will have to somehow work around a 6.5-foot swing. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Cooper, or I guess Member Cooper today, what's been proposed is that it's basically like a covered shed, if you will. They may or may not have a door on the front. They haven't decided yet, and it depends on budget. But there will be a floating dock, as we'd recommended that there be a floating dock, to your point, because as we're seeing, the water levels are fluctuating a great deal lately, and it just makes sense to do that as part of it. But it's not protruding from, it'll be in the same footprint as what's there now.
If I just may, then, that sounds great. You're going to have the flexibility of a floating dock. The other point I'd make about permanent shore boathouses on cribs is that they're allowed to have walls, and I think you're sort of describing something that might not, which improves the shoreline vista. So I hope that is the case as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further? Read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments approve consent application B19-12 to facilitate a lot boundary adjustment regarding the benefiting lands located at 3148 Island 820 Georgian Bay, subject to the following: that the deeds of the severed lot are submitted to the Secretary Treasurer along with a registered copy of the survey plan, that a complete set of digital drawings of the reference plan shall be provided to the Township of Georgian Bay, and finally, that Section 50-3 of the Planning Act is applied to all future transactions involving the subject lands. All those in favor? That is carried.
Thank you all.
Victoria, could you? Thank you. Hope you brought doubles for all of us, right? Victoria, do you want to start? I guess I'm sure Mr. Bocek can catch up. Thank you.
So our next application, we are now on to the variance applications for the
Sorry,
day.
I should have read that. Yes.
Oh, that's okay. So A19-43 was submitted by Margot Parker for lands located at 225 Steep Rock Road. So the request for this application is to permit the construction of a new single detached dwelling and attached garage pursuant to the 6 Mile Lake residential zone with a maximum gross floor area of a dwelling of 303 square meters, which is 6.2% of the total lot area, whereas 241.7 square meters, 5% is permitted. A maximum dwelling width of 29 meters, where 23 meters is permitted. A maximum front yard setback to a dwelling of 12 meters, and 16.5 meters respectively, where 20 meters is required. A minimum side yard setback of 3.7 meters, where 5 meters is required, and a minimum setback to a septic system of 20 meters, which is existing, where 30 meters is required. So here's a location map of the general area of where the subject lands are located, which is the southeast portion of 6 Mile Lake. And here we've zoomed in on where Steep Rock Road is located, just north of Whites Falls. So the property is designated 6 Mile Lake waterfront community in the official plan and is currently zoned 6 Mile Lake residential in the zoning bylaw. So here we have an aerial image of the property, and as you can see here, it kind of juts out into somewhat of a peninsula shape. And please note where some of the photos I'm going to be showing you, when I say that it's from the point or it's from the peninsula point, it'll be from down here, just for some reference. So the applicant is proposing to demolish the existing dwelling and rebuild a new dwelling with an attached garage. The new footprint encompasses some of the existing dwelling footprint. The proposed dwelling is 303 square meters in total gross floor area, with 52 square meters of that being a proposed attached garage. The proposed living area is 251 square meters. However, given the definition of gross floor area in the zoning bylaw, this all is included in the calculation. And so here we have a survey just indicating in gray, this is where the proposed structure would be located. As you can see here, this outline is where the current cottage is currently located, with the septic being located back here. So here is just an example elevation of what the applicants are proposing to build. Here we have some site photos. So this is the existing dwelling from the west side, just showing that this is where the majority of the new dwelling would be located, to this portion of the lot. And here we are looking at the majority of where that attached garage and additional square footage would be located. And as you can see here, 3 mature trees that were marked by an arborist, that those are the ones that would be needed to be removed from construction. So here, when I was speaking about that point and peninsula, so I'm standing at the peninsula point, looking towards the existing cottage here. This is the dock for the existing cottage, and then the neighboring lot to the east. So as you can see, the very mature vegetation that does exist, blocking the existing cottage from the water. And then so this is looking on the other side of the property towards the west. Again, as you can see, the heavy vegetation, noting that this demarcation on the trees just indicates some poison ivy areas. It's not that that's where the dwelling's located. I still got poison ivy anyways, even though it was marked, just want to indicate that. So now we're looking at the adjacent lands to the west. As you can see, that property is also a peninsula point, with the cottage being located quite close to the water. So the existing built form on the property, as you can see through the photos, is hardly visible from the shoreline. And the proposed dwelling footprint would be located within the general same area on the site. Some mature vegetation will need to be removed. However, no significant vegetation within the front yard area would be disturbed, which will maintain the existing vegetative buffer on the property from the water. The 6 Mile Lake community encourages balanced development located away from the shoreline, and promotes a naturalized landscape with little maintenance or site alteration. The existing configuration and conditions of the site make it difficult to meet the general zoning standards of a 20-meter setback at all points of the property. The development proposal does take advantage of the existing built form area of the dwelling, and the proposed development does conform to the intent of the 6 Mile Lake policies in the official plan. The proposed development would have limited visual impact, and the opportunity to apply site plan control on the property would ensure that the existing vegetation in the front yard will remain, maintaining the screening from the water. The proposal is considered to meet the 4 tests as per staff's report, and staff is supportive of the application being approved with the conditions as outlined in the report. The owners are East Coasters, so they are not here today. They're probably watching, but I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Victoria. Has there been any written correspondence received from the public on this application?
There is one letter of concern in regards to the septic location.
To Victoria's part, I assume the applicant is not present today. I will ask. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, I will close the public portion of the meeting and bring it in-house and direct my first question to Mr. Cooper.
Just for clarification, the septic system, 20-meter setback, that system is existing and it will continue to exist? There's not a new system going in?
So through you, Chair, you are correct. There is the existing septic system here. It is understood by the owners and the building department that the existing septic system will be able to accommodate the proposed development. It was my suggestion to include it as part of the variance, just in case if any minor upgrades needed to be done through this proposed development, to ensure that we would be able to sign off on a building permit and the applicant wouldn't have to come back to recognize the existing septic location.
Just hypothetical, let's presuppose that there was a problem with this system. It would be an upgrade as opposed to a completely new system? Do we know that or not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's my understanding that it would just be an upgrade, but again, that's something that the building department would do their thorough review on. When it comes to the zoning, the setback would not be changing.
The reason I asked the question is that if a full system went in, is there any reason that a new system couldn't be compliant and be on the other side of the road, entrance road, in other words, on the right-hand side of the property?
It's my understanding from a site visit that it could potentially accommodate in a different location. I don't think the owners are quite, they love that forested area in the back, and they do use it quite a bit, that I don't think that they would want to remove significant vegetation to do so. So that's why we chose to include it in the application, to leave it in the same location.
Thanks for the clarification.
Mr. Demke.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. One, the flag line, I think there was something come out and said it was poison ivy, not trees to be removed. But I think you had said there's a bunch of trees going to be removed, so I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, so through Mr. Chair, this photo here, these large trees with the X's on them, those are the main mature vegetation that's going to be removed. There is some shrubbery here, obviously, that's going to have to go as well. This other photo was, I just wanted to identify that this is more just a view from the water of the proposed development site, not this is all being removed. It was poison ivy indicators, that's all.
Okay. Then the other thing was on the letter of objection, there was also, I think, at the bottom, 5 signatures or 6 of approval, all part of that letter. So I just wanted to clarify that maybe I didn't read it right, but.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, that was the applicant, when they submitted their application, they did have, essentially, it was more of a, like they made a letter with, it was, yeah, it was just more of a sign-off type of sheet from some neighbors. I didn't indicate that those were technically letters of support because there was no individual wording from those landowners, but still that was submitted by the owner.
Yeah, and they were
no
support,
objection. Yeah, it was
support
just
signatures.
No objection. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ferguson.
Are there additional trees to be removed other than the couple we see with the orange X? I thought there were some on the other side of the cottage, or maybe down the laneway that there was going to be.
Through Mr. Chair, there might be 1 or 2. I can't recall from my site visit. I think maybe in this back corner here. I was more so identifying those specific trees in here because that is considered kind of the current front yard, that within the front yard, those would be the specific mature trees to be removed.
And we're not, the existing cottage faces towards the right. And will that remain the same when the new cottage is built?
The existing cottage is kind of funky, where I think originally the main view was along this wall.
Isn't it still?
There was a minor addition put on it where they've kind of shifted the view this way. But it is the new main wall of the cottage would view down to the peninsula point. Yes.
Thank you. I did a site inspection of the property, and I thought that there was many more trees.
There, yes, it is a very
would be
heavily
taken out.
treed area. Those were the ones that were marked for my sake when I was on site. But again, through site plan control, staff will be able to identify what is to be taken out, and we will have the discretion to require additional plantings if we see fit at that time.
Just to comment, this would have been an example where if the actual outline of what was going to be built had been staked and even taped with the caution tape, it would give us an exact location of where things are going to be, how they're going to end up, and what other types of vegetation may have to be removed. You know, we have a fairly slim border between the right-hand side of the cottage and the shoreline, and I think that if you start moving equipment in there, I kind of worry about just how strong the buffering will be in the final analysis.
And through Mr. Chair, when I went to the site, it was taped off, but they did do that earlier in the fall before they went back home, so that being,
Yeah, it was really tough to tell
Destroyed.
between
Yeah.
spray paint on trees
Yeah,
and some pink lines
absolutely.
here and stakes there.
Yeah, yeah.
I found it thoroughly confusing,
Right.
and it would have been much, much better had we been able to say, okay, here's what we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Member Bojack.
Thank you, Chair. Being the counselor for Ward 3 and in contact with both cottage associations on 6 Mile Lake, I've had no response from either of the associations, so obviously they don't have an issue with this. My only concern, and perhaps you've already thought of this, is a site plan agreement. As everybody's aware, the environment's number one. Chopping trees down for no reason is not acceptable. So if we have a site plan agreement in place that we can enforce, then I think that would be a great idea.
absolutely, and it is included as a condition to the approval in front of you.
Okay, thank you. I have no objections then.
Member Caddo.
The only question I had was, as Member Cooper asked about the septic, and other than that, have no objections.
Thank you. I just have one point of clarity, Victoria, if I may. The picture you showed of the front of the proposed new cottage, is that the view from the canoe, or is that the view from the lake? From the road, sorry.
Trying to trick me.
Wait a minute, let me have another.
The canoe's on the roof of the car, right?
So this view here would correlate with this wall.
That one, okay.
That you can see here. It was just what was provided from their building drawings. Looking at where the existing cottage is here, at least from my site visit, I definitely don't believe, regardless, there will be some trees obviously having to be removed. I think the extent of the existing cottage compared to this of what you would see is quite minor.
You know, I think my concern was if this was, I'll call it the backside or
Yeah.
from the roadside,
No, this
was
would be the
there
water
going to be
side.
pillars, or, you know, was it a walkout, or is it fairly
Yeah,
level
no,
ground? But
water
it looks
side,
like
very
it's fairly
flat.
level ground, so that
Exactly.
answers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments before I read the motion? Then I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments approves the minor variance application A19/43 for 225 Steep Rock Road to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit the construction of a new single detached dwelling and attached garage pursuant to the 6 Mile Lake Residential SR6 zone, with a maximum gross floor area of a dwelling to 303 square meters, 6.2%, where 241.7 square meters, 5%, is permitted. A maximum dwelling width of 29 meters, where 23 meters is permitted. A minimum front yard setback to a dwelling of 12 meters in the southeast corner and 16.5 meters in the southwest corner, where 20 meters is required. A minimum side yard setback of 3.7 meters, where 5 meters is required, and a minimum setback to a septic system of 20 meters existing, where 30 meters is required, subject to the following: that the approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. That a site plan control application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and required additional plantings from the front yard in the manner prescribed by the application policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. That approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if the building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Next is application 19-45 for 321 Pratt's Road to the Planning Department.
Our next application was submitted by Patricia Mitchell and John Kozowski for lands located at 321 Pratt's Road. So the purpose of this application is to request to permit an expansion to an existing legal non-complying dwelling pursuant to the 6 Mile Lake residential zone with a maximum dwelling height of 7.5 meters where 6 meters is permitted. So an overview map of where the subject lands are located. So they are located in the south of 6 Mile Lake, relatively close to our last application. Here's a zoomed in location map of the subject lands, again, just north of Whites Falls Road. So the lands are currently designated 6 Mile Lake waterfront community in the official plan and zoned SR6, the 6 Mile Lake residential zone. So here we have an aerial of the subject lands. And here we have the existing footprint of the dwelling, and this is not intended to be proposed. The proposal is, as I'll show you on the next slide, for the purposes of going higher. So the existing footprint on the property is not proposed to change. The applicant is proposing to increase the height on the existing dwelling to allow for better internal circulation. The dwelling would increase the height by 2.4 meters to a maximum of 7.5 meters, increasing the existing gross floor area by 31.8 square meters, which would result the total gross floor area for this cottage to be 128.4 square meters, which is approximately 1,300 square feet. So the existing footprint of the dwelling is not proposed to be increased or altered through this application, and the existing dwelling is located approximately 8 meters from the water. So here we have just, again, essentially what is existing in the front elevation and what is being proposed. So as you can see here, this portion to the left of the dwelling, they are proposing to increase a portion of that height. So I have some photos from the subject land. So this is the rear of the dwelling from when you're walking into the property. So as you can see here, this is essentially the location of where that proposed height would be located. And so here is a view looking towards the house from the main dock, so looking up at the property, and as you can see, it's quite a steep shoreline down to the water. And here is a view from the second dock, more to the east of the property, so again, you can see the dwelling and the mature vegetation that exists. And this is a photo just again depicting the steep shoreline and the existing vegetation in front of the main dwelling, and looking at the existing main. So this is just a view from that main dock out. So the existing built form on the property is minimally visible from the shoreline, and the footprint of the dwelling is not proposed to be increased or altered through this application. The increase in dwelling height will not have a negative visual impact from the water to adjacent properties, and the minor increase in gross floor area is in keeping with the policies of the official plan for the 6 Mile Lake community. And also the proposed height is in keeping with the maximum height for the 6 Mile Lake zoning in general. The reason why it is a maximum of 6 meters is because this is a legally non-complying dwelling that is located closer to the water. So staff do support the application as it meets the 4 tests for a minor variance in the Planning Act, and the owners are here if you have any questions for them or myself.
Thank you, Victoria. Has there been any written correspondence from the public on this file?
The township has received one letter of support.
Thank you. Is the applicant present today? Would you like to add anything to Victoria's presentation?
Sure.
Please step forward, put the mic on, and state your name for the record, please.
Good morning. My name is Pat Mitchell, co-owner of this property. The real purpose of this is to make the unit more functional, really. It's not changing the footprint, and the design thought process has been to make it very minimal change from a viewpoint, but increase the functionality.
Yeah, John Kosowski. Basically what Pat indicated, that was the objective and the motivation to make this change.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this application? Seeing none, I will close the public portion of this meeting and ask the members if they have any questions, starting with Mr. Ferguson.
Do we have a picture of what the front of the cottage looks like now?
Sure, so, and this is a digital depiction anyways, but
I just wondered if there was, okay.
it was really hard to get right in front because of the steep, it was so steep.
Yeah,
I didn't want to fall
you
down
tell by the
the rock.
stilts.
Yeah.
I guess my thoughts are that if anything, the cottage will be more attractive once you've made these changes. The difference you're asking for is approximately 5 feet, and which isn't huge. And with a square footage of around 1,300 square feet, this certainly isn't an overly large cottage, so I do not have any problem with this application.
Thank you, Member Ferguson. Member Bochek, any comments?
Yeah, Victoria, it looks like there's maybe a walkout basement from the bottom, is that correct? Or is that simply a block wall down there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's just like open storage down there. There's no, it is not a living space in the bottom area, just a block wall.
Okay, then I have no problems with this application.
Thank you. Member Caddo.
No, it looks heavily vegetated, so you're not really going to see much the way it is now, so I have no problem with this.
Thank you. Member Demke.
Thank you. Just a question for clarification in my mind. What's the non-compliance? Is that the 8 meter from high water mark? And because it goes up?
Exactly. So through you, Mr. Chair, you're correct. The reason why it's considered illegal non-complying is its current distance from the water.
Okay, that clarified just a question I had. I have no problem with this.
Member Cooper.
I don't have any questions, and I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Any other comments for Member Bochek?
Just, as you go up Pratt's Road, your driveway is the one that goes off to the right, and it dips down by the marsh and then back up, and then you go right again to the very end? Okay, I just want to know that I went to the right place, because it is really hard to see.
That's correct.
Both from the water and from the road, so, okay. I
And
went to the right place.
And we're beside, I think it's
It's near a beaver dam on Crown Land on one side, and
Crown Land.
we have one neighbor.
Crown, the provincially significant wetlands, no, Crown Land there.
Right.
Okay, good, thank you.
As a lot of the committee members will attest to, that driving some back rural roads at this time of year can be a real challenge. And so it's great that you're able to get there.
Good. Any other comments before I read the motion? Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments approve the minor variance application for A19-45 for 321 Pratt's Road to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit the expansion of an existing non-compliant dwelling pursuant to the 6 Mile Lake Residential SR6 zone with a maximum dwelling height of 7.5 meters where 6 meters is permitted, subject to the following: that the approval of this variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application, and that the approval of this variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? Carried. Our next application is A19-46 for Scott at 24758 Georgian Bay Shores. To planner, Dana.
Refresh the PowerPoint we added to it. Thank you for your patience. Right, so the next minor variance that we have today is for 24758 Georgian Bay Shore. The application is proposing the expansion of the existing deck to 69.2 square meters with a 15.3 square meter covered portion. And the deck will project 4.3 meters or 14 feet from the front wall and 1.8 meters or 6 feet from the side wall. The deck will also have a 0 meter setback, and I'll show you more on the survey, to the southeast corner and a 1.2 meter on the northeast corner. But I will show you on the survey what I am referring to. So as you can see, the zoomed out portion of the subject lands, you can see it circled in yellow, and it is just west of Georgian Bay Island National Park, just to put everything in perspective. And a closer view, so it is within the Freddie Channel and just southeast of Cognasheen Lake. The subject lands is zoned Cognasheen Shoreline Residential Island and it's designated waterfront within the Cognasheen Coastal Waterfront Community, waterfront within the district official plan. Just an aerial view of the subject lands. The subject land is just shy of 2 acres. It's about just over 9,000 square meters in lot area. This is just a zoomed out survey. Yeah, they're 9,290 square meters or 2.3 acres, and they have 60.4 meters of lot frontage. And I do have it zoomed in just to give you a more clear idea of what it is they are proposing. So as you can see the existing cottage on the screen, so they're proposing to expand the existing deck along the front of the cottage and along the side. So they have this irregular lot line, as you can see. So this was done when they purchased their shore road allowance in 2015. They didn't want it, when the cottage was originally built, when you buy your shore road, you generally project the straight line. But in doing that, the straight line went through their cottage, and they didn't want to take away any frontage from their neighboring property, so they came to an agreement that they would just wrap their lot line right around the existing cottage, so it was fully on their subject lands. So this would be the 1.2 meter setback to the deck, the 2.5 meter setback to the covered portion, so they're expanding this existing covered portion, and the 0 meter setback to that interior side lot line. So even though it's the side lot line, it's in front of their cottage, and it would go right up to that. So there is a pin there. Just to give you an overview of what the subject lands look like. You can see the existing dwelling and the vegetated buffer from the neighbor, and you can see the existing deck on the front and portions of the deck on the side. So again, this is the existing development, and this is looking at the shoreline to the east. So there is type 1 fish habitat along the shoreline of the subject lands, but it is located over to the west, and they have received a letter stating that there will be no impacts since there's no in-water works and it will not negatively impact the fish habitat. To give you any idea of where that fish habitat is, it's way over to the west of the subject lands. And this is the neighboring property over to the west. This is a view from their dock looking up at their existing development. And this is the deck that they want to expand. So currently it projects 8 feet off the front, and they're proposing 14 feet. So as you can see, it's not very functional when they have the table. You can't get around from one side to the other. And this is that side deck. So it's currently 3 feet, and they're proposing 6 feet, just so 2 people can pass each other and make it more functional since it's quite narrow. And they're proposing to expand the covered portion with that expansion of the existing deck. So this is a view to the neighbor at the east. So as you can see, there is significant vegetative buffer, and the neighbor did submit a letter of support. The neighbor on the east, where they're requesting the reduced interior side yard setback. And this is a view to the existing shoreline. This is standing on the deck, and they're proposing to maintain all of the vegetation, so that's why the deck kind of goes on an angle around the side of the cottage. And the shoreline, again, that area of expansion, so you can see the deck is anywhere from 4 to 10 feet. This is a view of that southwestern point of the subject lands. And this is a view of the deck that's located on the west of the dwelling. So what they're doing is they're proposing to match this projection. So this deck is 14 feet, so the deck on the front of the cottage will match in order to make them more aesthetically pleasing and more functional. So again, that area of expansion, it will expand out 3 feet, and there is a pin down there for reference. And the northeast interior side lot line. So the intent of the side yard setback is to ensure buildings and structures are appropriately separated from others on adjoining lots in order to maintain privacy and enjoyment of the waterfront area. And the neighboring property is developed to the east of their property. So another view of that interior side lot line and a view of the deck where that interior expansion is. So this is standing towards the point of their property, looking at the existing and proposed development, so they want the decks to match. So this is a view of the area of expansion. So they're going to be expanding this deck out 6 feet. So as you can see, they are still adequately set back from that shoreline, and you can see the varying topography. And a view of Freddy Channel. And the neighboring property is developed about 95 meters away from where the subject property is proposing their construction. So the dwelling is under the maximum permitted gross floor area, so inclusive of the covered portion after the expansion, it is 90 square meters. My apologies, in the report I wrote 70, I meant to hit the 9, but apparently I hit the 7 instead. So my apologies for that, but they're allowed to go to 120, so they are still well under what they are permitted. So as you can see on the survey, there is not the 177.4 contour, which is the high water mark. So the survey was completed in 2015 when the owner purchased their shore road allowance, so when they got that irregular side lot line. The neighboring property does not own their shore road allowance. So we reference the size and the projection of the deck off the dwelling because we have a point of reference from that existing dwelling to go off of. There's also a pin, which is where the 0 meter setback is. So staff did a site visit prior to circulation of the application, and given the topography and elevation of the deck, we can see that it's set back from the high water mark, and during the site visit, it was at the high water mark. As we know, the high water levels were high this year. So the variance would enable staff to be able to sign off on a building permit on the proposed application, and staff are in support of the application and recommend approval. The owner is present if you have any questions for him, or if you have any questions for myself.
Thank you, Dana. Has there been any written correspondence received from the public on this application?
There were 3 letters of correspondence received, one of which clearly noted a letter of support and one of which clearly noted a letter of opposition.
And the third?
Was not clear in either direction.
Not clear. Thank you. I see Mr. Scott here. Mr. Scott, would you like to say anything further to Dana's presentation? Please turn the mic on and announce yourself.
Good morning, Mike Scott. Yeah, I don't perceive that there's any challenges. We have a very good relationship with the neighbor to the east. When we did the purchase of the Shore Road allowance, that was predicated on the purchase of the property. It's a 100-year-old cottage that was 80% on our Shore Road allowance and 20% roughly on the neighbor's Shore Road allowance. At the time, nobody knew, nobody cared. When we purchased the property, we determined that we wanted to also purchase the Shore Road allowance. Township had, if you can go back to that original, Dana, when on the Shore Road allowance with the property line now. If you see on there, when we bought the Shore Road allowance, the township's position was to move it over and bring it right down to the water line, which would have meant that the neighbors would have lost 25 to 30 feet of shoreline in terms of their property. So in discussion with them, we agreed that that wasn't realistic or fair on our part. So we intentionally jutted that back in and followed the same property line down to the water. That decision is creating the minor issue on that corner. As we want to expand that deck, you're now right out to that corner pin, but it doesn't infringe on the neighbor's property, and they're in agreement with it.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to this application? Seeing none, I will bring it to the committee and ask Mr. Cooper any questions.
Yes, I think generally I'm not necessarily concerned about this application, other than the fact that there's some missing information, and specifically the high water mark on the survey. And it's my understanding, when we are working on Georgian Bay, that we need to see the high water mark, and that will allow us to understand things like lot coverage. And I've heard that this is compliant from a lot coverage perspective, but I still don't see the high water mark. So that is certainly the main issue for me. The setback isn't ideal, but there's some constraints, and I understand that. But I think there's missing information here. So that is one thing. And secondly, in terms of concerns around that, I believe some of these issues have been raised from the Cognizine Cottages Association, which is in, this building is in that area. And along these lines, I believe there were 2 letters that were pretty clear about that. Maybe one wasn't received, but I think our committee received some of the letters. There were some issues with transmission, also some issues with the fact that there's such a short window of time to make comment that it's very difficult for busy people to get responses in. Having said that, I wouldn't in the long run be against this necessarily, but I would like to see full information before I could approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Demke, any comments?
Just the zero clearance for this interior side yard setback. I understand the neighbor doesn't have a problem and is okay with it. In the future, if they sell, could that be a potential issue because it's right against the lot line? I'm not that familiar with this, so I asked the question.
Through you, Chair Matthews, to Member Demke. So the point of the 0 meter side yard setback is to this pin here.
Yep.
So that is where they're requesting that 0 due to the irregular shoreline. The neighbor does not own their shore road allowance, so they would have to purchase theirs. But they're developed 90 meters to the east. Yeah, sorry, making sure I had the right direction. So I don't see it impacting them in any way. And it is very densely treed over in this area, so they would also need to keep a 5 meter setback to that area if they wanted to build anything down there, such as, I guess the only permitted shoreline structures would be a dock or potentially a boathouse, but functionally they're developed to the other side of the property, so I don't foresee it being an issue.
Yeah, I guess my question more is the fact that it's 0, is that could somebody object if they wanted to, and not that they have here. I'm more thinking of the future, because I don't understand maybe the setback's enough, but if it's 0, then that's not in compliance.
Maybe I'll just take that one,
Yeah,
Mr.
thanks.
Chair. So through Mr. Chair to Member Demke. The intent of side yard setbacks in the zoning bylaw, and that's really what we're dealing with here, is the setback from the side lot line. The intent of those setbacks in a bylaw performs a variety of functions. One of those functions is to maintain the general overall character of the area and make sure you don't have buildings close together on abutting lots. And that clearly isn't the case here. The development on the neighboring property is well away from this lot line, as Ms. Setterby identified. Another reason for a side yard setback is to make sure that you can get access to the rear portions of the property from the front portions of the property. That can clearly be accommodated here around the other side of the building, or even underneath the deck for that matter. Another reason for that is so that maintenance can be performed on buildings or structures without trespassing on neighboring properties. In this case, it's a really, I'll say it's one point of the structure that requires that 0 meter setback, and the structure can be accessed from other areas of the site without trespassing on the neighboring property. So for all those reasons, we believe in this specific instance, the 0 meter setback for this structure at this location is minor and meets that intent of the zoning bylaw.
Okay, no, thank you. That helps me with this case, but also in future ones to understand there's more than just the number of the lot. So I have no problem with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Caddo, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, just with the covered deck, that's staying the same size basically. Is that the roof line? Is it coming out just?
Yeah, the roof line on the covered section will come out another 3 feet to
okay, but it's not
balance
coming
out
down
with the
towards
deck,
water anymore.
The distance and the slope will remain the same.
Okay, thank you.
Member Bochek.
Thanks for the presentation, Dana. I'm going to ask a question of Councillor Cooper. I was unable to open up the file that was attached from the CCA, but I was able to open up the file that was attached from a constituent of yours. And perhaps you could let me know, are they basically stating the same thing? I'm sure you received the same 2 emails, and usually I can open up the CCA's letters, but this one I couldn't get open. If it's the will of the chair, I'd like to get clarification on that.
Cooper, if you'd like to respond to that? Well, I don't know whether I'm an expert on this or not, but yeah, I think effectively, yes, it's a concern about a technical question here. There's a couple of them. One is the way certain measurements are made, the fact that we're not using the high water mark versus the water's edge, and it's my understanding, and I'd like to have an answer to this question, and that being, why do we not have the high water mark on this? Why aren't we requesting that be there in order to understand what we're really looking at here?
Okay, I got that from the constituent's letter as well.
So so that and then the Cottage Association is pretty much the same. The constituent letter was much more detailed.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
They're both. By the way, the constituent letter is also somebody that's a planner. Thank you. So I would like to hear an answer to the question.
Yeah, so further to that, and I was simply just going to reiterate what Councillor Cooper said about how important the high water mark is on surveys, more so now than in the past because of the increasing waters that we're seeing year after year after year since the big fall. So high water mark is something I looked for on the survey, and obviously other people have looked for it as well too. So not that it's going to change my mind on the application itself, but I think it is a critical piece of information we should have. Jamie, you can.
Through Mr. Chair, just to deal with that point of why I guess the question is, why did we not require a survey of the high water mark in order to evaluate this minor variance application? I think that's the question.
That is it.
That's we're trying to get at here. So I've asked Ms. Setterby to provide a picture of the property. So the township does have a document that identifies that surveys are required for minor variance applications on waterfront properties in order to evaluate those applications. In this instance, there was a survey that had been prepared in 2015. That survey identified where the water level was in 2015. What we looked at was we looked at the water levels in 2015 and where they were at. They were at the 176 between 0.5 and 0.7 that year. So effectively, not quite a meter less than where we are now. The site visit was conducted at high water level this year, and based on the topography of the shoreline, it was quite clear that it's a fairly steeply sloping shoreline. It's not a very shallow shoreline, so the water is fairly close to where it actually was at that time, and that was when Ms. Sutterby did the site visit, she identified that. I think this picture shows very clearly that the deck is set back a significant distance, or quite a distance from the water. So what we determined in this application is that we do have two absolute reference points. We have the pin that's in the lot currently that identify that where the jut is in the lot line, and we also have the existing wall of the dwelling. So the variance is specifically applied to the setback or to the projection from the wall of the dwelling. So in this instance, we had enough information without doing the site visit, having the historic survey, not to require the 177 floor to be surveyed in this instance, to be able to evaluate that minor variance application based on the floor test. Costs aren't intended to come into play, but it would be a significant cost to undertake that survey for a project that doesn't yield a significant cost, so to speak.
Right, where the misunderstanding could be is on the far end of the deck in this pictorial picture here and in the survey. If you extend that deck out, which is currently, they said 8 feet, it doesn't look 8 feet, but if you extend it out to the 12 feet, it looks to me like the pillars would be down on that lower plateau, which could possibly, water could rush up in there in surge and roll-up times. That was my concern. And without having you here to explain that, if it had been in the documentation and written on the survey, then we could figure that out for ourselves. So I thank you and applaud you for giving the explanation, but in the future, if there's any way we can have it on the survey, I understand cost is always a limiting factor. Sometimes it's not worth the cost to do, but it's certainly, when you're looking at a minor variance, to not circumvent, but to change the existing bylaw, it's kind of helpful for us to have that information. So just reiterating what Councillor Cooper said and what the two letters of concern were addressing as well too. Thank you.
Thank you both, Mr. Robinson and Member Boschak. Member Ferguson.
Dan, I just want to take a second and talk a little bit about these notices that are sent out, these notices of public meetings. I know that, for example, there are timeframes both for comments and for other things, and I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of the background of why these dates are included in the planning reports.
Sure. Through you, Chair Matthews, to Member Ferguson. So notice we have to circulate 20 days prior to a meeting. So we circulated this notice on October 25th. The Planning Act only requires, I believe, 10 days, but our official plan requires 20. So we request that comments be submitted by November 8th. So that's 1 week prior to the meeting in order to give staff time to respond to any comments that come in, just with the challenges of having comments that come in the night before, the morning of. We want to be able to have a response to them and to give the committee some more time as well to be able to read them.
Thank you. Now I believe on this particular application, we received 2 pieces of correspondence, one from the constituent and one from the Cotters Association that came in either late last night or this morning.
Through you, Chair Matthews. Yes, I believe one came in at 11 p.m. last night and one about 9 p.m. The one was sent to staff this morning because it didn't, I guess there was email issues and it kept bouncing back.
Okay. So in effect, that puts additional pressure on the planning department if there are, and I guess the constituents' letter was quite detailed and really puts pressure on you folks to try and answer these and come up with answers, as it does for the committee to look at it and understand what's going on too. I believe that the application from the Cottage Association, that they were able to speak with or work with a private planner on this application, and I'm wondering if there were any comments from that planner received in any of the correspondence that was sent to you.
So they did circulate it to a private planner. I spoke with them yesterday morning about the application, and they didn't submit anything in writing, but from our conversation, they didn't want to make any comments because they felt that the application was minor and there was no need for them to submit formal comments on it.
Thank you, Dana. That's very informative.
I will just make a point that I have a little challenge, I think, as some other members do, with the zero setback from the pin. And Mr. Robinson, I think you've explained that fairly well, that it's a single point. I guess my concern is if the neighbor to the east should decide to build a boathouse down there and ask for a variance to be zero clearance from his side yard because my neighbor got zero clearance, the Scotts are going to be looking potentially at somebody's boathouse, right? That said, I also understand, sort of the jog, and it is very limiting. The other option, I guess, that I could see is to not have it totally wrapped around the cottage, which probably doesn't facilitate the need of the Scotts either. So that's one point I'm sort of wrestling with, and I would agree with Member Cooper and Bochek about the need for better information on surveys, and if we can just ask the planning department going forward to try to facilitate that policy, I think that would help us all. I'm fairly familiar with this property. It is fairly high up, and I guess the only possible problem could be, as Member Bochek said, the pillars, if the water came way up, as it did about 2 weeks ago when we had a 6-foot surge and played havoc with a lot of cottagers up there. So, any other comments, Mr. Cooper?
First, I would just echo some of that, but I want to get clarification. Do our bylaws say or not say that for an application like this, we have to show the high water mark on our survey? Yes or no?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't have a bylaw that says that. There's no bylaw that says that.
So I was under the impression that we had directed our planning department 2 or 3 or 4 years ago that all surveys have to have a high water mark in order to be able to consider an application like this. And you're saying that's not correct? That there's no such direction whatsoever? Or why do we even ask for it then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you asked me if we had a bylaw that stated that, and we
So
don't
what's
have
the
a
right,
bylaw
what's the
that
term
states
then?
that.
What are we required to do?
So we have a document, the municipality has a document that's called Township of Georgian Bay Amended Requirements for Surveys for Building Permits, Minor Variances, and New Lot Creation. It's like an information document that we have. And what it states for minor variances is the survey requirements for minor variances. So it says applications for minor variances will require an Ontario land surveyor to pin and verify the location of the proposed building or structure that is less than the minimum required setback in the zoning bylaw. All minor variances applications on waterfront properties and legal non-conforming properties are required to submit a plan of survey prepared, confirmed by an on-the-ground site verification and certified by an Ontario land surveyor. And then it goes on to say exceptions. A new plan of survey is not required if an existing survey is deemed acceptable by the township. So there's an exception. If you've got an existing survey and it's deemed acceptable, you don't need to do a new one. And then it says a plan of survey is not required for minor variances for docks, height, or expansions further away from the lot lines. So it's on the basis of this policy and the exception that if you've got a plan of survey, a new one's not required if deemed acceptable by the township. So as I mentioned, I've already provided council with the committee with the reasons in this instance why staff did not require a survey to evaluate this minor variance application. So committee really has two options. If committee agrees with the staff report that was prepared, then they can authorize the minor variance application. If committee is not confident in the staff report because the high water mark isn't identified on the survey, then committee could defer the application and send the owner back to have a survey completed. So that identifies the high water mark. So those are really the two options that are available to the committee. I think committee needs to make or deny the application outright. So those are the three options that are available. So it was staff's position that we could evaluate the minor variance without the survey, and we could provide our professional opinion on that basis. And I think that's fully in line with what this document identifies and the exception that's provided within it. So that was our position. Others may have other opinions on that, and that's totally reasonable. Everybody can have their own opinion, but that was staff's opinion, and that's the reason why we didn't require it.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Does that answer your question, Mr. Cooper?
It does and doesn't, but thank you for that. And so effectively, under the current circumstances where many of us thought that there was a very strict line in the sand which said all surveys must have high water mark there in order to move forward on anything, you're telling me we really aren't where we thought we were, so that's helpful. So thank you for that. I just want to deal with one other issue, which is the notification and timelines for letters to and letters of support or objection for any of these applications, to gain better understanding. It is my understanding at the present time, there's a couple of issues. One is that any sort of letter of objection or support must be in prior to the application. I don't know that we have we enacted anything to date that says you have to have it in 6 days or 8 days in advance? Could you answer that? And then I have a follow-up question. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, so just to confirm, you said in prior to the application, you mean in prior to the meeting, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so the Planning Act allows for submissions to be made right up until the minute the hearing happens, absolutely. The township does put in the notices a date when we would like to receive those comments by, because our objective as staff is to provide committee in these instances with the best information available and the most research on those matters. So we're basically telling people that when you get that notice, take a good look at the notice and the information and let us know if you have comments, and hopefully we can respond to those and do the research necessary so we can provide committee with the most informed recommendation as possible. If we don't get comments, what seems to be happening in many instances is people aren't even looking at the proposal when the notice comes out. They're waiting until the staff report comes out so that the staff report can be critiqued, and then we're left in that situation where we would prefer if people took the time to review it up front so that we could address those comments as part of the staff report and give committee the best information so that it can make the most informed decision. That's how the process is designed. Just doesn't seem to be unfolding in that manner. Absolutely, people are well within their rights to submit comments right up until the meeting happens. So I just wanted to let you know that that's the process that.
Yes, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you. Just so for clarification around that, thank you. And I think one of the reasons that some of these submissions are coming in so late is that it was 3 business days before we got the full report. So it's not, you're not getting all the information you need when the notification goes out. You're getting all the information on Tuesday of this week. Is that not correct? That's when the staff report comes out?
Mr. Matthews, that's correct. The staff report comes out, but the notice is provided 20 days, and if someone which does identify what the proposed modifications are, and all of the information is available at the township office as per the Planning Act. So what we would expect in a typical circumstance is someone would review the notice, contact the municipality if they have any questions or comments, and provide their comments, and then we can address them in the staff report, as opposed to critiquing or responding to the staff report. The idea is that we get those comments in advance. That's how the process is designed.
one
if I
last
could-
one, Mr. Cooper.
If I could just finish on that point, then I think what we're learning here is there's some issues around process. One, having enough time to comment or for the planning staff to respond to comments coming from the public, and I think that's very valid. Equally, I think the public has, especially if you're based outside of the township and can't come in and look at surveys, et cetera, I think it's might be incumbent upon us to, in the planning area, to have our reports at least 10 business days in advance, not where we stand now. And I understand that there's a concern about necessarily having those reports out because there's not enough time. Then maybe we have to bump it to the next month. I'm just making a comment, but you know, both sides need to adjust. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Perhaps that's something the Planning Council could address and look at. So, any further questions on this? All right. I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments approves the minor variance application A19-46 for 24758 Georgian Bay Shores to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit the expansion of an existing deck to 69.2 square meters with a 15.3 square meter covered portion with a side yard setback of 0 meters to the southeast to the deck, a side yard setback of 1.2 meters to the northeast to the deck, and a side yard setback of 2.5 meters to the covered deck. The deck will project 4.3 meters, 14 feet, from the front wall and 1.8 meters, 6 feet from the side wall, subject to the following. That the approval of the variance is granted and fixed on the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. That a site plan approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and areas of new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. That approval of the variance expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? It's carried.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I think I would like to propose that we take a 10-minute break.
I was just going to suggest that we take a 10-minute bio break, and we'll resume at 10:55.
Thank you.
Thanks for the explanation,
So did you realize that we don't command surveys with that?
10:55, and we will reconvene the meeting. Our next application is A19-47 for Vanderbrock, at 450 White Falls Road, to the Planning Department.
Okay, so the next application you have in front of you is to permit an addition to an existing dwelling, and to permit a rear yard setback of 5 meters, where 10 meters is required, and a dwelling width of 14.1 meters, where 11.4 meters is permitted. And under section 411, you're permitted as of right to expand by 6 meters, and the applicant is proposing to expand by 6.1 meters. Just to give you an overview where the subject lands is, you can see it on the screen. It is on 6 Mile Lake, and it is just off of Whites Falls Road. Just a closer view. So it's zoned 6 Mile Lake residential, and it is designated waterfront within the township and district official plan, and it's within the 6 Mile Lake inland waterfront community. Just to show you an aerial view of the subject lands, you can see the irregular shape of the property. Here is a survey of the subject lands. So you can see the existing cottage, which is hatched, and the existing deck. They are proposing the addition on this existing deck here, and that is the location of that 5-meter rear yard setback. The addition is not going closer to the water. The closest point is 9.4 meters to the existing deck and 11.5 meters to the cottage, and it will be 16 meters to the closest point, or 15.5 and 16 meters to that addition. There's no change to the existing lot coverage, because the existing deck is over 1.2 meters, and the addition will just be placed on top of it. So the existing deck was included in lot coverage when they replaced it previously. Just to give you an idea, this is the location of that proposed addition. So they did replace the existing deck a year or two ago, and they did build it up to code so that it will support the proposed addition. They just wanted to get the deck replaced and then go for the variance at a later date. So this is looking northeast from where the proposed addition is. This is looking from the addition to the shore, and you can see the existing boathouse. This is standing in the front yard, looking at that proposed addition, so it will go on this existing deck. And this is looking to the shoreline to the west. And just another view from that front yard, looking at towards that addition. So the intent of the maximum permitted dwelling width is to limit built form and to maintain a balance between built and natural form on a property in order to protect the natural heritage and the aesthetic quality of the waterfront area. This is looking northeast and looking north out into 6 Mile. My photos are a little dark. It was a dull, gloomy day. And the location of that proposed addition. And this is the rear of that proposed addition. So as you can see, there is that steep topography and rock, so they can't push it back any farther. And the rear of the subject lands is crown land, so that's what they will be abutting on. And another view of that rear setback. So the intent of the rear yard setback is to ensure there's appropriate setback between buildings on abutting lands. The adjacent property is crown land, and due to the topography, it won't negatively impact the use of the adjacent property. Just another view of that proposed addition. So as you can see, the shoreline is there is a steep slope towards the shoreline. And standing at the rear of that addition, looking towards the shoreline, so you can see there is some mature vegetation in order to buffer it. And this is the rear, so the entrance into the cottage, so coming down the driveway. So as you would note in the report, the original condition stated that the septic be upgraded. So a septic was approved by the Ministry of Environment in 1976 for 2 bedrooms. So this condition was then removed for the septic to be upgraded. So the CBO and the septic installer went out to the property, and there was no room to be able to perform these upgrades. So it was noted through the building department's review that there's 3 bedrooms in the cottage. So 1 bedroom is going to be removed, and that will be done through the building permit stage. So the building department will ensure that a bedroom has been removed so that they comply with what their septic was approved for, that 2 bedroom. The screen room doesn't add to their septic system since it's not habitable under the building code, since it's just going to be screened. They don't count that towards a septic, but since they reviewed the application and it was noted that there was 3 bedrooms, 1 will have to be removed. So I just wanted to note that that condition has been removed. After conversations with the CBO, that will be dealt with during the building permit stage. So staff have identified that the application does meet the 4 tests under the Planning Act, and we are in support of the application. The owners are present if you have any questions for them, or if you have any questions for myself, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Dana. Were there any letters from the public on this application?
No letters of correspondence were received.
Would the applicant care to approach the committee and add anything, or? All right. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on this application? Seeing none, I will bring it forward and close the public session and ask Member Ferguson if he has any questions or comments.
The rear yard setback is to Crown land. The dwelling width, permitted 37 feet, at my age I can count feet and inches, is requesting 46, so that's a difference of 9 feet. And as you saw, you know, the land is quite steep topography behind and beside. So I would, you know, and it's a 248 square foot addition, and it's well within the size structure permitted. I don't have a problem with this application.
Thank you. Member Bochek, any comments?
Similar to Member Ferguson, I don't have any real issue with this application. I'm willing to support it.
Thank you. Member Caddo.
No, I agree with my fellow members, and I support this.
Thank you. Member Demke.
Thank you. I like to get to all these places I can drive to. I could not figure out how to get into this property.
That
so
makes 2 of us.
I was parked on the main road, and cars were whizzing by, so I thought, I don't know. So anyway, I don't know how you do get into it, but I had also one question about where the addition's going to be put on. Is that deck totally where it is? There's no extension out from that?
Through you, Chair Matthews, to Member Demke, yes, so it will go exactly where the deck is. They don't have to alter the deck in any way, and it was built to support an addition.
And how do you get into there? Can you drive in?
Yeah, down the driveway.
Oh, I don't know that area, so I drove around. I thought, I don't know how to get in there. It's 3 deep off of White Falls Road, so.
Dana found it.
Yeah, I found it, so. There is, let me see. So I think the driveway came about here.
Wow, I didn't see any driveway there that I could go into. Okay.
Yeah, it had the owner's last name, and then I think it says something about Butterfly Way. Dragonfly Way.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I have no issues with the application. Thank you.
Member Cooper.
I was just going to say to my neighbor here that it's probably wise to take a trailer and a boat with you if you can't get in from the other side. But quite seriously though, I just want to understand, and maybe I wasn't listening carefully enough, but in terms of what's actually happening here, it says an addition, and I heard about the bedroom and the septic system and so on, and I'm sure you probably said this, but I'm not quite seeing it here. What's being done here? Is this a screened-in veranda?
Through you, Chair Matthews, to Member Cooper. So we circulate our applications to the building department for them to comment and bring everything into conformity if there is any issues. So they're proposing a screened-in porch. We just call it an addition for planning purposes. It's still gross floor area under the zoning bylaw. Under the building code, the screen room, since it's just screen and not 4 seasons, doesn't impact their septic, but they still review to ensure the entire building complies with what their septic was approved for. So sometime between 76 and now, an additional bedroom had been added to the dwelling, which doesn't comply with what they were approved for, so they would have to remove a bedroom in order for the building department to sign off on their building permit. A little bit confusing.
I think I understand what you've said. So in effect though, one could, in time, convert this from a screened-in veranda to a normal sort of room with glass and so forth. But you couldn't convert some of that space to a bedroom, is that correct? And so there'd be something in our bylaw that says that? Just to make sure that we're not providing another bedroom somewhere else.
So, under the zoning bylaw, it's still gross floor area from a planning perspective, but under the building code, it wouldn't comply. So if in the future they wanted to turn it into a bedroom, their septic wouldn't have the capacity to be able to support it on the building code side. Planning side, whether it's a screen room or a full bedroom, doesn't make a difference because it's still gross floor area and it's still all included whether it's screened or not screened, but it will be the building code side that they wouldn't comply with.
Any other comments? All right. I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approves the minor variance application for A19-47 for 450 Whites Falls Road to zoning bylaw number 2014-75 to permit an addition to an existing dwelling with a rear yard setback of 5 meters, a dwelling width of 14.1 meters, and an expansion of an existing dwelling width by 6.1 meters, subject to the following. That the approval of the variance is granted and fixed to the subject site plan, extent, location, scale, and use contemplated in the application. That a site plan control approval application be submitted and approved, and that a site plan agreement be executed detailing the proposed development, existing vegetation protection areas, and areas of new planting within the front yard in the manner prescribed by the applicable policies of the Township of Georgian Bay official plan as they relate to the administration of site plan control. That approval of this variance expire 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the approved structure. All those in favor? Carried. And to the applicant, a tip from my colleague over here. Has site plan approval been explained to you, how it works and the pleasure of paying $500 to get it in place?
No.
All right. Well, you may want to get in touch with Dana after and talk to her about that, because it can take a bit of time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we come to our final application for the day, which is A19-48 for Jobin at 125 Ravine Way to the Planning Department. Victoria?
Application was submitted by Northern Vision Planning on behalf of the owners Todd Jobin and Louise Gibson for lands located at 125 Ravine Way, which is located on 6 Mile Lake. So the request of this application is to permit the development of a new dwelling and attached garage pursuant to the 6 Mile Lake residential zone with a minimum front yard setback to the west of 12 meters, where 20 meters is required, a minimum front yard setback north of 15 meters, where 20 meters is required, a maximum lot coverage of 9.1%, where 8% is permitted, a maximum dwelling width of 32 meters, where 16.25 meters is permitted, and a maximum gross floor area of 473.7 square meters, where 190 square meters is permitted. So overview of the location of the subject lands, relatively similar location to where most of the applications today have taken place, the south portion of 6 Mile Lake. And a bit zoomed in here, as you can see, just located north of Whites Falls on Ravine Way. So here is an aerial of the subject lands. As you can see, the lot is of a irregular peninsula shape with a very irregular shoreline along the boundary. The subject lands are designated 6 Mile Lake in the official plan and zoned 6 Mile Lake residential. So here we have the survey that was submitted of the proposed development for the property. So the overall intent of this application is to demolish the existing dwelling, as you can see here, that's located right on the peninsula, and rebuild the dwelling further to the rear with an attached garage as well. So the proposed dwelling is set back further from what currently exists, as you can see on the screen. And the proposed dwelling has a main floor with additional living area, including bedrooms located within the lower portion of the structure, which I guess would be considered a walkout type of design, with the attached garage. And again, speaking about the definition of gross floor area, all of that needs to encompass the total area proposed. So here we have the proposed elevations of the proposed structure. So the elevation to the top is what would be considered the main front wall of the cottage that would be facing the east shoreline of the property. And then the lower elevation is what essentially the structure would look like from the side. As you can see, the garage to the rear of the main area and this walkout portion that would be built within the topography of the site. And again, just an overview of how the structure is laid out. So this is the main dwelling proposed with the attached garage up to the rear. And again, speaking about that additional living space, that would be located below this area here and mimics about the same square footage as the main level to the lower. So here we have some photos of the subject lands from the summer that was taken from the water, which gives a good view of the existing conditions. So here we are looking around the north point, from the north in the water, looking towards the subject lands. Again, as you can see, the extensive vegetation that exists. Here we're looking at the proposed dwelling location from the water. So essentially the proposed dwelling would be located in behind this existing vegetation. So here we are at the northern portion of the lot, again looking south towards the point. And as you can see, the existing docking area. And here's the view of the existing dwelling that does exist in the portion of the peninsula. As a condition of the approval that is in front of committee, a landscaping and replanting plan would be required to be done by a qualified landscape architect as part of a condition to ensure that this area, once that structure is removed, would be significantly revegetated to maintain the existing visual buffering. And that would be, of course, done to the satisfaction of the township prior to any building permits being issued. So here we have a shot of the proposed building development area. And this is the view from the proposed development area looking towards the west shoreline. So this is essentially where the main wall of the cottage would be proposed. And then this is looking towards the east, so towards that inlet bay area. Again, you can see the existing mature vegetation that currently exists. And here's a shot from further out to the water. So this property here is the adjacent developed lands to the south. And so the proposed dwelling is located within this area here. Again, just to give an identification of the lack of visual impact that is anticipated in comparison to the surrounding lands. So given the irregular peninsula configuration of the lot, the proposed structure has been located as far back from the shoreline as possible while maintaining an appropriate septic envelope to meet the standards of the Ontario Building Code as well as the zoning bylaw. The key official plan policy for consideration would be section F.5.9.7.4, which allows for variances to the provisions of the bylaw so long that there is no significant visual impact occurring. Through the proposed dwelling, though the proposed dwelling requests a large increase in gross floor area from the permissions of the zoning bylaw, the development overall would be an improvement to the existing built form on the property and would allow for significant revegetation in the location where the existing development occurs right on the shoreline. The proposed structure does not exceed the maximum height requirements in the current zoning. And with the inclusions of the conditions as outlined in the report by staff, the proposed application meets the 4 tests for a minor variance in the Planning Act, and staff are in support of the application. The applicant's agent and the owner are here if you have questions for them or myself.
Thank you, Victoria.
Have there been any correspondence from the public on this application?
There were 6 letters of correspondence received, 5 letters of support, and 1 letter of objection.
Thank you. Apparently the applicant is here. Would you care to add anything to the presentation of Victoria? If so, please step forward, state your name, and push the mic button, please. So you can sit at one of these tables here.
Want me to try one? Good morning, members of committee and chair. Stephen Fauner, Northern Vision Planning Limited. For the record, 109 Meadow Heights Drive, Bracebridge, Ontario, P1L1A4. I'm here representing Todd Jobin and as well as Louise Gibson, who are the applicants in this particular case. I'd first like to thank staff for their positive report. I know that this isn't a simple application, that's for sure. I would note as well that there were 5 letters of support, and there certainly was 1 in opposition. I'll quickly go through the PowerPoint presentation that I prepared. There was in conjunction with this particular application, there was a supporting planning justification report. It was 34 pages in length. I'm obviously not going to read that and go through that. My PowerPoint presentation summarizes that. So I'm not going to go in detail through the planning framework, just so that you know that I did a similar evaluation that staff did, and certainly I would say shoreline vegetative buffers is certainly the #1 thing. I did write an article for the OPPI Journal a number of years ago about the importance of shoreline vegetative buffers. They are extremely important, and to me really dictates to a large degree what can happen on a property. So certainly recreational water quality doesn't come into play here because we have a moderately sensitive lake, and I know that the District of Muskoka is in the process of amending their policies regarding this anyways. 6 Mile Lake is a separate waterfront community, so what of course is in 6 Mile Lake is not necessarily what you look at across the board in the municipality. Visual impact, very important, and maintenance of the shoreline vegetative buffer are extremely important. There's also provisions for size of dwellings as well. I think you know the zoning on the property, you know what the setback requirements are in this particular zone. And the other provisions too that come into play in this particular application: lot coverage, gross floor area, and maximum width of dwelling. So in this particular case, the proposal is in fact to double the front yard setback from what is there now. There's currently a dwelling. I'm a little old-fashioned, so I'll stick with imperial if that's okay. But the current front yard setback is only 19.7 feet for the present dwelling, and the future one is proposed at 39.4, so that's a doubling of that front yard setback. The gross floor area certainly is large. I'll get into more detail on that. There is an attached garage, which is included within the definition of gross floor area. If you take away that garage, you've got something that is certainly smaller. It still is a large dwelling. And as well, gross floor area also includes covered porches. I believe, and I've dealt with a number of municipalities, I believe that Georgian Bay Township is probably one of the only ones that includes garage and porches as well in their gross floor area calculation. Proposed lot cover 9.03%, and the width of the dwelling, this is, I'm going to mention this, a little open to interpretation. I use the side of the dwelling that faces out into the main channel of the lake as you go by. That would be, as you're looking at the property, you'd be looking at it from the west looking east. That's what I thought was the most reasonable calculation, and it is approximately 82 feet. This is the site plan. Unfortunately, I don't have the CAD capability to darken the lines, but there is an existing dwelling, and proposed there is shown in brown, but I think the staff did a good job of darkening the proposed dwelling. This is just a close-up of that. The blue is the area where the setback, a 30-meter setback, and that's where the septic system is going to be located within that area. So we can certainly meet that requirement, even though it's a very irregular shaped property. It is a peninsula, sometimes very difficult to deal with in terms of redevelopment. The elevation, this is the front elevation I think you've seen. Just want to point out with the elevation at the top there that the right-hand side, you can see a change in the roof line. That's actually the garage portion. You could potentially move that garage away a foot, and it would not be part of the calculation for gross floor area. So in terms of site characteristics, Victoria sort of stole my thunder and I guess used the photos I'd submitted as well, which is fine. These are in my report, so again, this is from taken from the water. This is looking east, and this is again the proposed building site and the significant vegetative buffer there. This is looking in from the north, the point, and the dwelling is behind the dock, immediately behind the dock again, about 19 feet back. And it's somewhat visible, certainly not in your face by any means, but there is some visibility there, and this will disappear and be removed. This is from the little back bay. Really no one sees this area, but this is the existing dwelling that's there. And this is, again, you saw that. You can see sort of in the middle of the photo, there's a red stake there. To the right is the lake itself, and to the left will be the proposed building site. So it's a very well vegetated site and an excellent shoreline buffer. This is looking out from what would be roughly the front wall of the building. And again, another one showing the vegetative buffer. And this is the photograph. This is the neighboring property to the south that I have a photograph of as well. And this is looking down the property line. So certainly the vegetation changes, I'll just say, quite a bit on the neighboring property. So in terms of my analysis of this, there's a shoreline vegetative buffer, a target of 75%, and that certainly will be attained. Certainly more of that will be left than that quite easily. The policy does allow or requires a 20-meter setback unless there are certain mitigating factors, if I can call it that, and one of them being a lack of lot depth. And because this is a point, there is really a lack of lot depth. Doesn't matter which way you go or where you go on this property, you run into that front yard setback because it is a point. And as mentioned in Victoria's presentation, the OP does allow for variances to the maximum gross floor area, provided that the visual impact will not be significant. And I would suggest in this case, because of the shoreline vegetative buffer, that the impact is not going to be significant. Front yard setback is improving. I mentioned that before. It's actually doubling what is there now for the current one. The dwelling on the point is being taken off the point. And the challenge with dwellings right out on a point is, of course, they can be seen from different angles, if you will. This will only be seen from the lake directly out in front, and quite frankly, I don't believe that the new dwelling is really going to be seen much at all. Proposed gross floor area there is just over 5,000 square feet, and I've noted what it's made up of, the porches, but the garage itself is some 800 square feet or so. Certainly if you took that off, that would reduce it in many respects. I'm also going to point out here that there was a recent minor variance approved that you're probably well aware of. It was in front of committee in the name of Fisher. If you were to take the garage off in this particular case, we'd be right at that, basically the very similar square footage, in fact a tiny bit less than Fisher. The challenge with the GFA approval, or provision, excuse me, in my opinion, is it doesn't take into account the shoreline vegetative buffer, doesn't take into account the height, and we are complying with the height provision of the bylaw. It doesn't take into account setbacks, architectural style, nor lot coverage. And I think all of those parameters certainly are within reason. It's just it is the GFA. And what could happen with, in terms of trying to comply with the GFA, again, the garage could be moved away The floor area, for example, of the building could be reduced by bringing in the back wall, but it's not going to change that appearance from the lake. So again, gross floor area is one that typically you don't see in zoning bylaws. That's been my experience. I was the director of planning at Muskoka Lakes Township for 25 years. We went through quite an evaluation process a number of years ago, and there was talk about using gross floor area, and it just didn't accomplish the desired objectives, if you will, because you could manipulate it so much. Really, things like lot coverage and shoreline vegetative buffer were more important, quite frankly, than gross floor area. And gross floor area creates, from an administrative point of view, a challenge because, you know, what's included within that gross floor area. It can be a bit of a challenge, like area under stairs and so forth. Do you include those or don't you? What do you include in the basement? Do you include a utility room or don't you? So there are certainly challenges with GFA. Just noting in terms of lot coverage that 8% is fairly modest. Other jurisdictions within Muskoka are utilizing 10%, 13, and 15%. 15 is actually Bracebridge, and 13 is the town of Gravenhurst. And they do have significant waterfront areas. So 8% is fairly modest. And the increase in lot coverage overall, we're looking at 428 square feet, which in my opinion is fairly modest as to how much we're over. And I understand that through staff that this is in line with other approvals that have been granted through in terms of the dwelling width, I note that the zoning bylaw definition speaks to any 2 points, which tends to leave it, I think, open to interpretation as to where those 2 points are. It says, I underline the word any, so you could pick 2 points anywhere in the dwelling and measure them. I happen to use the width that faces out to the lake, that people are going to see it. The real view from the canoe, if you will, is going to be from the basically from the east, or sorry, from the west looking east. And so my measurement was less than what had been indicated by staff. And I think the other thing to consider in this application is the actual frontage is 630 feet around the shoreline, so it is significant. The bylaw frontage is considerably less. And if the actual frontage were used, then you would actually have a, based on the way I've looked at the width of the dwelling, you'd be at 13.1%, which would be well within your requirement. Neighboring properties, I think again, this was pointed out, the property immediately to the south, and that's it a little bit closer. The dwelling is a bit smaller than what my client is proposing, but I will tell you that at the end of the day, my clients will not be as visible as this, that elevation of the building. This is one just a little bit farther to the south, another couple of properties to the south, and certainly the building and structure itself is certainly not offensive in any way. It's just that it doesn't have the tree cover that my client's property has. Again, it is fairly modest, but you would be able to see this for quite a distance out on the lake, even though it's a smaller building. So in conclusion, it's my opinion, and I agree with staff, that the proposal does meet the 4 tests of a minor variance. In terms of the general intent of the OP being maintained, there's limited impact because of the existing buffer. Built form will not dominate the natural form, again, because of the buffer. Proposed lot coverage is within reasonable limits to go up, and the official plan does allow for certain variances to the requirements on 6 Mile Lake. In terms of the general intent and the purpose of the comprehensive zoning bylaw being maintained, again, the buffer, I keep emphasizing that. Setbacks from the lake are actually being enhanced in this particular proposal from what is existing. The lot coverage, again, is within previous approval parameters. And a reduction in the gross floor area will not change the appearance of the dwelling from the lake. Is it desirable for the appropriate development or use of the land? In my opinion, yes. Certainly the proposed dwelling needs to be replaced. It's very old, in need of repair. The overall scale of the development, in my opinion, is not out of character with what is on the lake. And once again, the buffer will be maintained. Is it minor? In my opinion, when you look at and evaluate whether an application is minor, I know it's ultimately up to committee, of course, but you look at what is the impact. What is the impact to surrounding properties? There's 5 letters of support. I know a couple of those are neighboring property owners. In their opinion, they are not going to be affected or impacted. In my opinion, because of, again, the shoreline vegetative buffer and the screening, my experience, I've seen literally thousands of cottage properties. I would, in my opinion, say that the impact on the surrounding properties will be minimal. The application is minor, so. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this application? Seeing none, I will close the public portion of this meeting and turn to the committee and ask Mr. Demkew if he has any comments or questions.
Thank you, and thank you for both presentations. I certainly understand the whole process and moving back from the setbacks and everything like that. I just can't get around my head that this is not a major, like that it is a minor variance given the gross floor. I have no reference point now to go by. So I understand the impacts, and that's what I usually look at as well, but 150% over what I'm supposed to look against seems to me a little much.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper, would you have any comments?
Surprisingly, I do. I guess a few comments. One is just reading the sort of overarching official plan for the 6 Mile Lake area. I haven't read it the last week or so, but I have read it, and I fail to see how this fits. I don't think it's minor. In 2 ways. GFA is massive, well over double, and even the dwelling width is, by my calculation, 97% over what is allowed. So I can't support it.
Thank you. Mr. Ferguson, any comments?
Yeah, I had received some information, and this was from a prior OMB decision on 6 Mile Lake with similar characteristics to the application before us. And to paraphrase it, the OMB's decision was, while visual impact is an important consideration, the 4 tests of a minor variance must also be taken into consideration. And I happen to agree with my other members saying that a maximum dwelling width and a maximum gross floor area, we're 2,000 feet permitted, and we're looking for 5,100 at 249% overage, I do not consider to be minor.
Thank you. Member Bochek, any comments or questions?
Question for our planning department, which is where I think this should be directed, is given the gross floor area being so far over, would this not have been considered for a zoning amendment instead of a minor variance? And what is the trigger point, or is there a benchmark that you use to say, okay, this isn't minor in nature, this should be looking at a zoning amendment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the application that was made was for a minor variance, and the applicants, the owners and the applicant have the ability to either apply for one or the other. Myself, I have done extensive pre-consultation with the owner as well as the applicant. I've been to the site many times, and through my pre-consultation analysis of what was being proposed and what the potential alternatives would have or could be on the site, when it was determined by the owner and the applicant to submit for a variance, and again, that was their choice to do so, I made it very clear that I would be in support of that given site visit, et cetera, in my review of the policy. So there was no, there's no specific benchmark as in they have to apply for zoning if it goes to a certain level. It's a matter of they have the right to apply for either one.
So my fear is that moving forward, we're setting a precedence that the SR zoning that exists on this property currently falls under the privy of the 6 Mile Lake Community Plan, the official plan bylaws. And if this had been a zoning amendment and we had a different zoning on this property, you know, exclusive to this property, there may be the ability for me to support it. But when it has the existing zoning that it does, and you're asking to go this far over, it says to everybody else on the lake that has the same zoning, well, maybe there's a possibility I can do this too. That's not the intent of the 6 Mile Lake Community Plan. So my question was, why was this not a minor zoning amendment instead of a minor variance? And you've answered that quite accurately, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bochak. I'll get to Member Caddo. Any comments?
Having trouble with the size of this, of course. As far as visual impact, I don't think it's going to be as bad as the neighbors because it's heavily wooded. I don't think you'd see it as much, but once again, I'm having trouble with the size. It's a little too big for me.
Thank you. Member Ferguson.
I did site inspect the property yesterday, and I was having difficulty determining exactly where this new structure is going to be. It wasn't, there were some stakes around, but there was also all kinds of orange painted marks on trees, which I didn't know if that was to be part of the building or trees to be cut down. It would have been really helpful if this building had been staked and taped so we could see exactly where it is and exactly what additional trees need to be removed in order to arrive at a good decision. So, I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. I want to comment. I agree that you know, there's a somewhat of a net improvement by moving the building further back from the lake. I admit that probably the visual impact will not be quite as dramatic as some of the neighbors that you've shown in the photographs, Victoria. But I think I share the concerns of many of the members on the committee that I cannot put my stamp on this as being minor. So, are there any other comments from members? Seeing none, I will read the motion.
I'm just wondering, I'm thinking out loud, if there is some type of compromise here. If we were to defer it, would you be willing to sit down with your clients and maybe see what you could do to clean up some of this large square footage, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you for the opportunity to respond. Yeah, it's certainly, you know, when you're faced with the possibility of a denial, you don't like to see that. I don't like to see that for my clients. You know, to me, I've given my reasons why I feel it's supportable, but nonetheless, committee hasn't necessarily agreed. We would certainly take another look at it. That would be the preference, certainly over taking the vote, which appears as though it may be denial today. We can have a look at it and see what can be done, and we could possibly make some improvements.
All right, thank you for that. I think, Member Cooper, comment?
Yeah, I'd certainly be happy to support the deferral. I will comment that need to be a pretty significant change to get my approval in the future. And what I plan to do after this meeting is share some case law with my fellow members here from the City of Toronto. It's called Gasparis. It's a case where actually the OMB was overturned by Superior Court of Ontario, whereby it was related exactly to this, minor versus not minor. And the judge went through the 4 tests and explained them very clearly. Clearly, even the OMB didn't understand the 4 tests. So I think it's important for us to remember that the 4 tests are very important, and understanding what minor means. Sometimes it just takes looking at the dictionary. Thank you.
Member Demkew.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd look at a deferral if, in fact, Mr. Bocek's recommendation of looking at a rezoning might be one of the factors, because I also agree with Mr. Cooper. I can see a significant reduction, which would probably totally change the whole cottage. So a deferral with a broader spectrum of consideration.
Member Ferguson.
I'd like to thank you for having an open mind here and for consenting to, again, to continue to work with us. We don't like denials either. You know, it's a long process, it's an expensive process, and we'd love to come to consensus, and I would certainly support deferral.
Anybody else? Member Bocek or Cato, any comment?
I'd be in agreement with that deferral also.
As the owner, am I allowed to say something?
Technically, no, but I will, you know, if you have something new
No,
to
I'm just
add.
curious from a landowner's standpoint and a new resident on 6 Mile, with everything that's happened with the new survey, am I best just to wait because it is only 2,000 square feet, except for it has a basement? So am I best to wait till the new survey goes through and bring this back, or just sell it and move to Gloucester? From my point,
Personally, I can't,
what I'm saying?
I can't answer that. Perhaps Mr. Robinson could like to address that.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I think what a deferral would enable is the proponent to have that consideration on whether to wait or whether to redesign. So if there's a deferral that's made, we can have that discussion on that.
Right. And just for your information, a deferral means that it can come forward with some modifications. If it is voted on and defeated, that's the end of the story.
Yes.
It's just so that you're very clear on that, all right? All right, I would make a motion that we defer this application until new information can come back to the committee.
I think you need to read the motion and then we'll agree on a deferral.
I was asking Karen, she said we can just,
Oh, we can do it? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would suggest a deferral. All those in favor? Opposed? In favor of the application?
There's no recorded vote here, so I did not put my hand up for a deferral. The motion still passes.
All right. All right, thank you very much. That concludes the official part of today's meeting. I have a couple of other motions here. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment approve the minutes of October 18th, 2019 as amended and circulated. All those in favor? Carried. And finally, be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments does now adjourn at 11:44 until December 13th, 2019 at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? Thank you all.
I'm going to lay it out and you guys can just go down the line. It's the fastest way to do it.